NK cells, which then kill the targets directly. Yeah. It is not quite exact, but scientists just assume. So lastly, I'm going to talk about active and passive immunity. So active immunity is a resistance that results from body's contact with microorganisms and their toxins. So example of this is vaccines. So when doctors inject vaccines to your body, basically they're just inducing the role of memory cells response. They're just basically they're injecting some small amount of virus, and yeah. And second type is passive immunity, so it is direct transfer of antibodies, and the common example of this is mother and fetus. So mother, basically via their milk to fetus, they give the antibodies. Lastly, role of cytotoxic T cells and NK cells in case of defense against those virus-infected cells and cancer cells. So these cytotoxic T cells release the contents of its secretory vesicles, and perforin is the most common type of protein that is released from this vesicle. So they allow the entry of cytotoxic substances and cause the attacked cell to become leaky and die. And NK cells and activated macrophages, they do not have antigen specificity, so they bind to any virus-infected or cancer cell. And they secrete chemicals that are capable of killing the bacteria.
And so I'll talk about the factors that alter the resistance to infection. So whereas there are numerous factors that could influence it, such as protein, calorie, or nutrient malnutrition, a pre-existing disease, or unaltered tissue, etc., the two main things that I'll be talking about is AIDS and antibiotics. Mostly about AIDS, because antibiotics took up a very small part of the textbook, but still. So about AIDS, I'll talk about how it destroys the immune system, sadly, and how AIDS symptoms differ from the HIV virus itself, and how HIV is transmitted from person to person, and how we're trying to treat it so far, although there are no vaccines. As for antibiotics, I'll just talk about the definition and its pros and cons, considering the time constraint, and everything else. So first, AIDS. Before we talk about AIDS, I have to talk about HIV, or the human immunodeficiency virus, because that is the virus that causes AIDS in the first place. So HIV is part of the retrovirus family, which means that it has an RNA nucleic acid core. That is the red part that you can see in the diagram. The RNA nucleic acid core has something called reverse transcriptase, which enables the virus to move into host cell and then transcribe its own RNA into DNA, which is the other way around, which is why we call it reverse, and then integrate into the host cell's chromosome itself. And then the virus replicates its own DNA inside the cell, and the cell, as a result, dies. So this is the brief life cycle of an HIV virus, or in other words, how HIV destroys the immune system. In general, to begin with, although HIV is any cell in the immune system can fall victim to the HIV virus, it mostly prefers the helper T cells. This is because the orange part here, which I wrote here as the CD4 part, it provides as a receptor for the surface protein on HIV called GP120, which is the green parts. So in other words, the green parts here called GP120 and the CD4, the orange part, are attracted together. So as a result, when these two come in contact with each other, the HIV virus binds to the helper T cells. So as a result, the virus enters the cell, and after that, the replicating HIV kills the helper T cell immediately. And also, the human body also somehow causes the helper T cells death, because cytotoxic T cells somehow attack the virus-infected cells themselves. And although scientists don't really know why, HIV also causes the death of uninfected helper T cells by apoptosis. So as a result, when this happens, a large number of helper T cells are somehow annihilated, and this doesn't really allow the proper functioning of neither B cells nor cytotoxic T cells. So this results in the immune system turning necessarily defunct. As a result, the AIDS patient victim is turned victim to infection and cancer that the immune system could normally easily take care of. So far, since AIDS was first discovered in 1981, so according to UN AIDS, and approximately 36.7 million people were living with HIV or AIDS worldwide. But to come up with this number, they would have to somehow diagnose the people with AIDS. So to talk about that, HIV is briefly diagnosed by the detection of anti-HIV antibodies in the blood, or even worse, the HIV RNA in the blood. Although HIV infection does not always correspond with AIDS symptoms itself, as HIV infection is without any symptoms, but AIDS is definitely with symptoms, but they are mostly simultaneous. As for simultaneous, I don't mean that they occur at the same time, because as I will explain later, they occurred in the period of 10 years, but I just said simultaneous because they somehow result in the AIDS symptoms. So over the course of 10 years, for the first 1 to 5 years, the HIV virus somehow destroys the cells in the immune system, mostly the helper T cells, in the process that I talked about in this slide.
Mm-hmm.
But still, the body somehow is possible to replenish the helper T cells by up to 5 years because the body regenerates itself and new cells are made every day. However, after 5 years pass, the body cannot replenish to a sufficient level of helper T cells anymore. So the helper T cell.
Why is that?
I think it's because I didn't really look into it because there wasn't really much about it in the textbook, but I think.
But
the
at
body
some
somehow
point in
fails.
those 5 years, it's
Yeah.
no longer able to replenish, and they don't know why.
They don't really know why.
Okay.
But the body fails to do so because I think the general physical state deteriorates, and that contributes to the reason.
Maybe it's exponential as it gets, the number that it kills increases more rapidly than it can
Then it
replace.
can take So the body cannot replenish them anymore, and with that leaves the B cells and cytotoxic T cells also pretty much useless. But then that leaves the immune system of the person defunct, and that results in numerous AIDS symptoms to show up. And the symptoms include easy infection by viruses, bacteria, fungi, etc., accompanied by weight loss, lethargy, fever, and sometimes cancer. And as a result, if untreated, the person will have pretty immediate death in the next 2 years. HIV can be transmitted by either unprotected sex or passing from a mother to a baby through either pregnancy or breast milk, and sharing injecting equipment, as well as contaminated blood transfusions and organ transplants. This is, I guess, why although HIV is impossible to transmit by either air or water, there has been such large number of people who cannot be cured. Also, the fact that there is no vaccine contributes. But although they don't have a vaccine, so far scientists have come up with a treatment called HAART, highly active antiretroviral therapy, and basically this consists of 4 drugs. The 4 drugs consist of, well, the 2 of them consist of preventing the reverse transcriptase inhibitors to stop HIV RNA from turning into DNA, and another one functions as preventing the cutting of the proteins by the helper T cells when it's infected by the HIV virus. The last one blocks the fusion of the virus within the T cell. So that's my general overview of AIDS. And the next tiny part, which is the last part, is a different topic called antibiotics. That is a diagram of penicillin, as you probably all know. And antibiotics is any molecule and substance that kills bacteria. It also functions as something that alters the immune response because it inhibits the bacterial cell wall synthesis, protein synthesis, and also DNA replication. However, there can be some problems if allergic reactions happen, toxic effects, and drug resistance, or by that, which I mean that some part of the huge bacterial population might be mutant and be more resistant to the drugs, which may result in those kind of mutant bacteria becoming more powerful and propagating themselves, so that the bacteria in general will not be effective with drugs at all. That'll be the end of my presentation, and I'll pass it over to the last person.
We're in several minutes left right now. No, I think I have to kind of speed on. So other people talked about how our bodies protect our bodies, but now I'm going to talk about how our own bodies try to attack our own bodies. And these are the things that I'll talk about today. And allergy, this is the definition that is in our textbook. It basically says that allergy is how our own bodies overreact to certain molecules. Yeah. And these are the common symptoms of allergy, like a rash and rhinitis. And there are mainly two conditions of allergy. The first one is the person has to be genetically predisposed. So the person has to have like a certain DNA that makes the T helper cells to overreact to certain antigens. And the second condition is the person has to be exposed to certain allergens. And this process is called sensitization, because we first have to sense the allergens before we react to the antigens. And then what is allergen? Allergen is antigens that cause allergy. And antigens are certain molecules that we inhale through our respiratory system or that are absorbed through our skin. And allergen is the antigens that cause allergy. And there are mainly four major types of hypersensitivity. And today I'm going to talk about focus on the first type 1 hypersensitivity. Type 1 hypersensitivity mainly relies on immunoglobulin E antibody, and this is also called Ige antibody, and it reacts in several minutes, so that's why it's called immediate hypersensitivity. And there are mainly two phases. The first one is early phase, and the second one is late phase. And this is the antigen presenting cells, and there are dendritic cells and macrophages, as Mr. Hyrie mentioned. And these antigen presenting cells bind to certain antigens around our somewhere in our bodies, and they move to lymph nodes. Regardless of the fact that our bodies is immune or not, it's just take the antigens to the lymph nodes, and they bind with the T cells. And before the contact with antigen presenting cells, T cells are called naive T cells because they have never been in contact with T cells. And after they have contact with these cells, they become primed T helper cells, and they are activated to Th2 cells. And this is what happens after the T cells changes form to Th2 cells. It releases interleukin 4, and interleukin 4 activates B cells. So it's like a chain reaction, as you can see in this diagram. And B cells previously produced another type of antibodies, but I thought it's not important about this in terms of this hypersensitivity. So when it gets activated, it starts to produce Ige antibodies, and these Ige antibodies bind to mast cells. And mast cells are like a type of granulocytes which degranulates or releases harmful chemicals that attack both our host cells and invading cells. And these antibodies bind to Fc epsilon receptors on our mast cells, and these help allergen to bind with the Ige antibodies. And after the allergen binds with the Ige antibodies, it gets activated and produces mediators. And for example, histamine is one of the common mediators that cause common symptoms of allergy.
Mm-hmm.
And the main thing is it dilates our blood vessels, or it causes smooth muscles around our bronchi to contract, which which makes it hard for us to breathe well. And there is late phase reaction, which happens 8 to 12 hours later after our contact with the allergen. And there are eosinophils, basophils, and additional Th2 cells that activate this reaction. And primed T helper cells, as I mentioned before, it activates eosinophils by releasing the interleukin 5. And eosinophils are also a type of granulocyte that releases, degranulates, and the certain harmful chemicals are released that attack our own host cells. And eosinophils, basophils, and Th2 cells they move to the site where the allergen is located to attack the allergen, and attack our host cells, and this happens in more. This happens. This activates like each other, and it facilitates the chain reaction so that we can actually attack our allergen. And eosinophils and basophils are like a type of white blood cells that help our immune system. And these are the symptoms of allergy. And there are hives, eczema, allergy, rhinitis, and asthma. And there are severe symptoms like airway constriction, anaphylactic shock, and death. And anaphylactic shock happens when there is lack of red blood cells that are transported to our brain. So that induces anaphylactic shock. And I actually have allergic rhinitis, and I don't agree with the fact that it's mild, but I guess it's better than this. So,
yeah, of course.
yeah. So that is the end of our presentation, and thank you for listening.
Okay.